Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, and a big hello and welcome to all of you that are joining us for the third and final webinar for the Young Pacific Leaders Program, the Small Grants Program, also known as the YPL Small Grants Program. My name is Phoebe Hybeck. I'm a Program Development Officer at Cultural Vistas, and I work on supporting the Young Pacific Leaders Program. The YPL Small Grants Program is an opportunity for Young Pacific Leaders alumni ages 20 to 35 to apply for small grant funding up to $10,000 US to implement innovative projects in the Pacific region related to the four core pillars of the YPL program: education, environment and resource management, civic leadership, and economic and social development. To help alumni prepare to apply for the YPL Small Grants Program, Cultural Vistas is hosting these preparation webinars, not only to provide additional information about the program, but to also support applicants in the application process. The first webinar was focused on developing and submitting a grant proposal. The second webinar was focused on putting together a core project team. And each of those webinars were recorded and can be found on the Cultural Vistas YPL webpage. That is culturalvistas.org/YPL, and then you'll click into the YPL Small Grant section of that website. The webinar today is, again, the third and final webinar before the application deadline, and it will be focused on budgeting. This webinar is intended to help teams interested in submitting a proposal better understand the budgeting process, review the budget template, as well as help answer any questions about what expenses can and cannot be included in the project budgets. For those joining us live today, you're welcome to submit your questions in the chat as we go along. I will have time to answer those questions at the end of the presentation, where we'll also have time for you to ask any additional questions you may have based on what's been shared today, or just about the application process in general. And for those watching the recording, please email your questions directly to Cultural Vistas at yplgrants@culturalvistas.org. The final recording will be uploaded to the YPL website, so the recording of today's webinar, it will be uploaded to our website before the end of this week, so you have time to review before the application deadline next week. For anyone needing additional accessibility resources, including access to the PowerPoint presentations, please feel free to reach out to yplgrants@culturalvistas.org as well, and we can be sure to provide that to you. We can get our slide to change. There we go. So as a reminder, on screen, you'll see the outline timeline for the YPL Small Grants Program. This is an important timeline to note and consider as you're preparing your small grants application and the project's implementation timeline. The most important date to note at the moment is the application deadline, which is next week on June 15th, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. New Zealand local time. As I shared, today's webinar is focused on preparing a small grants budget and how the budget factors into project management. Creating a budget, we know it can be overwhelming, but it is a critical piece of applying for small grant funding. And the budget that you submit in your application helps further explain the project idea that you've laid out in the narrative of your application by describing the items that will support the project implementation and help your team achieve the outlined project goals. So again, take a quick note of this timeline and those very important dates, especially the application deadline, which is next week, June 15th, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. New Zealand time. So to help with all of the budget information as well as the program application, we have a ton of information on the YPL Small Grants Program website, which can be found at culturalvistas.org/YPL/small-grants-program/. So I encourage you to go visit that website, and we will actually visit that right now. So as you can see, this is the main YPL Small Grants page, or YPL program page, excuse me, and the Small Grants tab can be found here. This is where you'll find the webinars. So as you'll see, webinar 1 and webinar 2 have been loaded for anyone who's not been able to access those webinars or weren't able to join us live. An important thing to note for the small grants program is that all of the applicants, especially with budgeting, must use the provided budget template for the project budget that you submit with your program application. The template for that budget can be found in the frequently asked questions section or the FAQ section under the section that says, how do I come up with a budget? You'll see in this underlined section that you can go ahead and select this budget template and it will take you to a downloadable version. You'll see in the bottom of my screen, this is downloaded there. That is the template that you should use. It is an Excel spreadsheet, and if you have any issues accessing this document, please just email us directly at the YPL Small Grants email, yplgrants@culturalvistas.org. We will be able to provide that document to you directly if you're having issues with the download. Another place where this can be found is in the application itself. So if you click into the YPL Small Grants Program application, and you scroll all the way to the bottom, in the supporting documents section, you will find it highlighted here. So again, you can click and download this template. This will actually open it in a separate email. So there's a few different, there's a few different ways to access this template. But the most important thing to note is that you have to use this template for the small grant program application. So to give you a little bit more information about the template itself, we're going to walk through in depth what you need to include. So one thing to note about this program application template for the budget is that it's a spreadsheet that's modeled after costs generally associated with grant funding opportunities. Since this program is funded by the U.S. Department of State, we at Cultural Vistas abide by all federal regulations outlined in the U.S. Department of State grant funding opportunities. This includes for both the overall YPL small grant programming as well as the individual small grants that are a part of the program themselves. The guidelines this program follows are typical guidelines found with other funder requirements for grant opportunities as well. So the way that this budget is structured is it's structured to mimic a lot of the other grant opportunities out there, the budgets that you'll need to provide. One of the things to note is that when applying for grant funding, no matter if it's for the YPL Small Grant Program or any other grant funding opportunity, it's very, very important to check the budget requirements before applying and definitely before submitting your application. This ensures that you're providing the correct information and you do not request funding for something that cannot be fundable. So again, make sure you go through and check that everything that you're applying for funding for is fundable. Going back to the items we discussed in webinar 1, it's incredibly important to make sure that you include all requested and required items listed in the grant application. This applies to the budget as well. So making sure that you're providing all of the requested information in the application, whether it be through the budget template or the application portal itself. So when first approaching to or starting to complete this template, you'll note that you'll need to complete the top section, which provides information on the project itself. So you'll see here the project title, the project location, and then the total amount of funding requested, and then the total cost share. Make sure that the information you're providing in this section is information that you provide consistently across all of your proposal documents. Your project title should match the project title that you include in your application and all of the additional documents you provide to support your project application. For the project location section, you'll need to outline where the project is being implemented. So if it's going to take place in multiple countries, please do list those out in that section. The total amount requested line, so this line right here that's highlighted with the blue selection at the moment, and the total cost share line are two different things found within the budget template. The total amount requested is the amount you are requesting from the YPL Small Grants Program. So the line that is currently highlighted is the funds that are the total of what you are outlining in the sections at the bottom of this template, or the total amount of money that is being requested from the YPL Small Grants Program, and the funding that will specifically go to the project you are outlining in your YPL Small Grants project application. The total cost share, so this next line that's now highlighted in blue, is outlining any funds that you may be receiving from other partners or funders. We have received questions from interested applicants about whether the project that you're proposing can have funding from other sources, and the answer is yes. For any type of grant funding, it is encouraged that you find opportunities to further sustain or fund your project. And for the YPL Small Grants Program, we do not need to know the specific details of those funds, but we do need you to include the total amount of money or the total cost share, which is what this is categorized as, that you have received for your project from other funders. Again, demonstrating cost share is not required for the program, but this does help highlight the sustainability of a project if it has funding outside of what you are requesting from the YPL Small Grants Program. As a reminder, for the 2021 YPL Small Grants Program, you can request up to $10,000 US. So that is the ceiling max. Projects may be conducted in the local currency of the project team or location. However, you'll need to be sure that when the amount is converted, so whatever amount you're applying for in the local currency or the currency of your choice, you'll need to make sure that when it's converted, it equals no more than $10,000 US. The total requested amount of funding and the currency being used for the proposed project needs to be consistent across all of your documents and budgets. So you're hearing a theme of things that I'm sharing with you today. Consistency is key across all of your application documents, and that includes not only your title, project location, but also the total amount of funds you're requesting and the local currency or the currency that you'll be using for the project. For the project, it's incredibly important that you only request the amount of small grant funds that you need based on your project proposal and budget research. You can request up to $10,000 US, but you do not need to request that full amount of money. If your project only needs $3,000 to be implemented, only apply for $3,000. Again, this is flexible. That $10,000 US is the ceiling that you can request, but do know that that is not the exact amount you have to request. As long as it's under 10,000 or just at 10,000, there is flexibility. So please only request the amount of funds that you need. You'll need to demonstrate that the money you receive for the project is being fully spent towards the project. So if your project is selected for funding, you will need to remain on target to spend the number of funds that you've requested in your budget for your project. Therefore, again, it's very important to ask only for the amount of funding that's needed for the project you're proposing. As your project proposal is reviewed, only feasible projects that outline clearly the connection to the requested funding amount and the project work plan and goals will be selected. One way to ensure that you are not requesting more than you need for the project, it is to request and search for quoted estimates on budgeted items you're proposing. So for example, if your project is a workshop in which travel to another Pacific location is needed, providing a quote for the flights outlines that the amount needed for each person participating to travel and ensures that the proposed amount is in line with the exact amount that you'll need for that expense. So the research for each of the budget items is very, very important. And these quoted items can be detailed in a budget narrative that would be included in the supporting documentation section on the application. So if you're providing this information and it helps make your application stronger and really helps to clearly outline the project goal, we do encourage you to include a budget narrative. So getting back to the overall budget template, after you complete the top portion of the background information, you'll see that the budget is broken up into 4 different categories. And those 4 categories are supplies, travel, personnel, and other. Each of these categories is set to guide you when you're thinking through and breaking down your project's cost. As previously mentioned, these 4 sections mirror a similar budgeting structure to other U.S. Department of State grant funding opportunities. And this document helps to provide not only a budget template for the YPL Small Grants Program, but also a learning resource for any future funding opportunities that you may apply for. So when you're compiling your budget, please remember budgets are meant to describe or list out what you'll be spending money on for the project. In other words, each item needs to demonstrate a cost of what is going towards your project. You do not need to fill out all of these lines. Again, this is just a template to help provide you with the structure, and you can add or subtract as needed. But do try to make your budget as detailed as possible. So in this section, you'll find the instructions to remember as you're drafting your budget. We encourage you to read through those instructions in full and in good detail so that you know exactly what is fundable and how to complete this template. So now to the item description section, which is where you'll find the categories. Some of the things that we'll walk through in each of the section just to outline for you examples of what could be included. So for supplies, this should be the things that you need to buy to help make your project work or to implement your project. And that could be, for example, if your project needs materials such as paper, pens, etc., this is where you would input those costs. We've had projects in the past that needed, we had a project focused on providing clean water sources and educational materials to help provide instructions on how to use the water filters, and those would have all been listed here. So whether it be the buckets that were needed or the educational materials that were needed, such as paper, those types of things can all be listed in supplies. Then you'll see in the travel section, this could be any logistics or travel costs that's needed for your project. Some examples include if you were to do a workshop where you're bringing people from different Pacific countries to another location in the region, or if your project is in a rural location and you need to transport people from an urban area to the project, you could include those transport costs here. If the project is an exchange program, there could be cost to bring participants for your project from one country to another. Travel cost could be, again, included in this section. And I do want to note that travel within the Pacific region is the only travel that is fundable. No travel outside of eligible YPL program countries or territories in the region is allowable with the Small Grants Program. We'll move down to personnel, which is a less common expense with the YPL Small Grants Program. Generally, this is only if you have to pay a professional to help implement the project, such as a workshop trainer or facilitator. This could be for professional services, such as multimedia materials or website development. And it's not intended to cover salaries or overhead. So again, it is not for salaries or overhead. The salaries, anything related to salaries or overhead is not allowed with this funding. So another thing that this could be is an honorarium or a speaking fee for a professional that could be assisting you with your project. So for those hosting workshops, if you're bringing someone to speak, you could include an honorarium. And this honorarium should not exceed $250 US per speaker. And then finally, the other category at the bottom, and this category will include any costs that don't fall under the first 3 categories. Some examples could include hotel meeting space for a workshop or a mentorship session, catering if you're hosting a meeting over lunch, or audio-visual tech requirements for a specific event. If a budget line item doesn't seem to fall within the first 3 categories of the budget template, you can input the item in the other category. And once you describe the category, or once you decide which category your budget expenses will go in, you'll need to be sure to include an item description. And so you'll see in all of these lines, so for example, under supplies, if you were to, using the water project that I talked about earlier, you could say filters for the water filtration system, or any supplies outlining what they're for. Again, educational materials, so you could say paper for educational resources, or instruction booklets. So again, those are just some top of the head examples, but feel free to definitely outline in these lines the line item description for each of the budget items you're requesting. So once you enter the description, you'll see that you'll need to provide the unit cost. And this, again, can be in either US dollars or the local currency of your choice. One thing that we ask, again, is that you please be sure to be uniform in this and use the same type of currency for each line and across your project. The entire budget should only be in one currency, either all in US dollars or all in the local currency of your choosing. And we ask that you do include the currency for your project at the bottom, and you'll see, screen is not, see if we can get to zoom out slightly. So this is actually a drop down. You can't see it at the moment. Once you're in the template, you'll notice that this is a drop down, and you can select from all of the Pacific currencies found across the region that would be of interest to have a project in. So again, this should be the currency that you're planning to use for the entire project. Once you enter in your unit cost, you'll enter in the number of units that you'll be requesting. So for example, say you were to purchase t-shirts for your project, you would enter, say the t-shirts were $10 each, and then you would enter in the number of units. So say you needed 27 of those, and that will automatically populate here. So this whole entire template is already formulated to automatically populate and total all of the inputted information. So this is where one of those, your quotations for your different line items is really important. So again, wanted to highlight that in the gray column, so column F, you'll see that the information will automatically be calculated. And it's important to remember that any item over 50 US dollars must be itemized and described. So you're not able to just include lump sums of the cost without fully describing the anticipated expenses. So again, providing a lot of description. And as I shared, this is where the information from the vendor quotes requested comes in handy to help ensure and outline the accuracy in your price estimates included in the budget. Finally, as the last point illustrates, in the instruction section, budgets can again not exceed 10,000 US dollars, and successful funding requests will be at a competitive rate and prove how costs directly relate to the project that you're proposing. As I noted, the spreadsheet will automatically tally your project expenses. And one of the things that I want to share, so again, the total will be populated here in line 52, and the line numbers may change depending on if you're adjusting to include more items in your budget. But this total line area that's highlighted, you'll see that that's where the items, let's see if I can zoom out a little bit so you can see it at the bottom of the screen. That will be where your total will populate. And one of the things that I want to flag for you all before you upload your final budget into the application is to be sure to check two very important things. The first is that each line item in the budget is calculating into the budget total, so that if you make any adjustments in the spreadsheet itself, you make sure that all of the lines that you added in, or if you've adjusted any of the lines, that they're totaling down here in this line item. So again, making sure that each of the items that you've estimated is included in the final total, and then that the final requested amount meets or is below the 10,000 US dollar threshold. And we encourage you not to forget to factor in exchange rates. So for those of you planning to use a local currency for your proposed project, there is not a set exchange rate that Cultural Vistas follows. If you decide to use your local currency as the currency across your project, it's important to factor in the currency conversion rates, which while developing your project, so that you don't exceed the amount allowable for the grant. So for exchange rates, a resource that we use quite frequently is, and we recommend, is this currency converter website. It's oanda.com, and you'll see once you're at the site, you can basically convert any currency that you'd like to see. And so this helps you estimate on average what to expect. Again, this site is a site that we use at Cultural Vistas regularly when trying to inquire about the exchange rate. And you'll notice that you can adjust the currency here. And then also the date in which you'd like to see the currency exchange rate for. So we'll jump back to the template. As a general practice, it's important to remember that for grant budgets, you should try not to move money between the budget categories when you're implementing your project. So that would be moving money from supplies to travel, etc. So not moving anything between these categories. And this further outlines why it is incredibly important to estimate the expenses that you foresee for your project as close to accurate as possible. As the budget template notes, you can reallocate. So you'll see here there is more information. You can reallocate money within the budget, but it should never be more than 20% of the category total. So never more than the total of each category, 20% of that. This is something we do not encourage, but if it is necessary, it should always be done with approval from the grant administrator. So in this case, for the YPL Small Grants Program, that would be Cultural Vistas. So communicating that if needed to Cultural Vistas. And for those of you who are new to budget management, it's easiest to try and avoid reallocating funds. Again, it can be allowable in minimal amounts as contingency for extenuating circumstances that might occur. But re-emphasizing this, it's important to communicate those circumstances and the adjustments needed to the funder. So in this case, for the YPL Small Grants Program, Cultural Vistas would be the grantor that you're working with. So as noted also in this template, you'll see in the highlighted lines, there are certain items that are not fundable with the YPL Small Grants. So these are the items that the YPL Small Grants Program cannot fund. And the first is international airfare to and from the United States. And that's unless you have a team member from Hawaii or an American affiliated Pacific territory and are conducting a cultural exchange program, or that team member needs to travel to the project location in the region. Staff salaries, as I shared before, if you need, and as well as overhead and office rent, if you need a meeting space, funds can go towards a shared workspace, but cannot be used to justify a long-term lease. Large items of durable equipment. This is an area we have received a few questions on from interested applicants. Large items of durable equipment are not usually funded, but a reasonable request for equipment may be made on a case-by-case basis. As noted in the last webinar, these items cannot be used for personal profit. So an example that would be fundable is a printer, only if you can explain why it is needed and imperative for the project, what you are planning to print as it pertains to the work you are completing through the project, and then would this be something that would be considered, or this would then be something that's considered fundable. So again, it's a case-by-case basis, but you do need to provide quotations for these items and clearly outline why they are absolutely imperative for your project. So then you'll see accessible representation or meals or entertainment. And I'll go ahead and zoom in so you can see this a little bit more clearly. Sorry about that. For example, something that would be not fundable is if you were to request funds to host a gala dinner. That is something that is not fundable. On this note as well, U.S. government funds, so the funds that are made possible through this program, they cannot be used for alcohol. Another item that is not fundable, academic research. This is not an academic grant. This is a project-focused grant looking for specific deliverables and outcomes, and therefore the application needs to show that specific deliverables and outcomes from a project will be met. So not any academic research. And then partisan political activity, funding cannot be used or applied to any government agencies or political activities. One of the things that I want to flag for you all is that if you're not sure about whether something can be an expense is fundable through the grant, or you should or shouldn't include an item, or you'd like to discuss if it could be considered on a case-by-case basis, please go ahead and email us at yplgrants@culturalvistas.org, and we can clarify for you if the item would be fundable. So that brings us to the end of the budget template. And again, we'll just scroll through one more time so you get a look. I know many of you have already seen this through your application starting to fill it out. But if you have any issues accessing this template, just let us know and we can be sure to get you a copy of it. One of the things that we'll jump into now is we will go ahead into project reporting and project management. Go ahead and start here we go. So as noted on earlier in webinar 2, the funding for the YPL Small Grants Program is dispersed in 3 separate allotments, and project teams are required to provide a project report each month detailing the expenses of the project, along with updating an update on project implementation, how it's going, the expenses, all of those things. So to remind you, if you're selected to participate in the YPL Small Grants Program, the project treasurer will receive 60% of the funds for the project after the kickoff workshop. The project treasurer will then receive 35% of the funds after submitting the required midterm report and the previous monthly reports that were required before October 2021. And then finally, the project treasurer will receive the last 5% of the project funds after submitting the final report with all of the final project updates. And this will be in January 2022 when the final report is submitted. So I'm mentioning this because it's important to think about project management holistically as you're developing your project work plan and application submission, especially when you're thinking through matching the expenses timeline to the funding disbursement timeline of the program. So for example, if you know that the majority of your project spending will occur upfront prior to the release of the additional 35% and 5% of funds, so you'll just have that 60% of funds transferred to you at that time, you'll need to think about how you'll offset the cost of those items that you cannot cover as you've only just received 60% after the kickoff workshop. At the kickoff workshop, for those who are selected to participate in the program, we'll work with each selected team to closely make sure that everyone understands reporting requirements, including how to track the expenses and how to report on the expenses as well. We'll also talk about what is possible during the budget management period. And following the kickoff workshop, each team, as I shared, will receive the 60% of the first transfer of funding that they requested. And selected teams will only be eligible to receive the funding that was approved in the initial proposal. So another important thing to note is that once you submit the budget figure for your project in the proposal application, that will be the budget for the project throughout the implementation period and through the end of the program if the project is selected. The transfers of the project funds will be sent as a bank transfer, again, to the project treasurer, and Cultural Vistas will cover the cost of the bank transfer fees. However, one thing to note is that if you have a project that will require you to move money between different bank accounts, you might want to consider adding a line item in the other category in the budget template for bank fees. Each month, project teams will submit a project report, as I shared, and you'll need to include a budget report along with the narrative. And the budget report will have a template, and we'll share that with the selected teams during the kickoff workshop. But this report will need to outline the expenses for the month, the expenses overall, and the remaining balance for each line item within the originally proposed budget. This report also needs to include all copies of receipts for each of the project expenses. So again, for anyone who has watched the recording from last week or was able to join us live, you'll note that we really put an emphasis on the project treasurer being organized and detail-oriented because they will have to keep track of all of this information. The monthly, midterm, and final reports will always be due on the last day of the month at New Zealand time, so at 11:59 p.m. New Zealand time. And again, as I shared, more information will be provided at the kickoff workshop for those selected to implement a small grant project. At the midpoint of the implementation period, there will be a midterm report that will ask for additional information and an analysis of how the project implementation is going. And after that report is received, we'll then transfer the 35% of funds. And in the final month of the program implementation period, once the final report is received, so at the end of January 2022, teams will then be transferred the final 5% of funding. I know I've mentioned this a few times, but I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of the funding timeline so that you can holistically plan in your work plan and in your project application for the funding timeline, and considering that as you're putting together the different components of your project. So the tiered disbursement, I know it's a little bit bizarre, but it really helps ensure that each project is meeting the work plan that was outlined and agreed upon in the program application. And it's important to note that each of these items are required because as you are developing your project and application, you'll need to think through how each will be factored into the project management timeline as well as your team responsibilities. As I shared, following the final report, the debriefing seminar will be held in February 2022. And at this seminar, project teams will discuss their successes, challenges, learnings, and overall project outcomes. Again, as I mentioned in previous webinars, programming and expenses, including the visa fees needed to travel to New Zealand, that's projected for February 2022, will be covered by the YPL program. For those interested applicants applying for the YPL Small Grants Program that are not currently living in the Pacific region, you'll be responsible for your travel to a Pacific country in the region, from which Cultural Vistas will then arrange travel to the debriefing seminar. So that's something to keep in mind as well. As we conclude the presentation, I want to iterate what I mentioned earlier. We'll be working closely with all selected participants during the kickoff workshop, as well as throughout the project implementation period, to ensure your team and your project is in line and your budget is meeting the set out budget that you proposed, as well as your project goals. The proposal budget should be focused on telling your project story through the expenses and the items that you'll need to make it happen. You do need to demonstrate how you plan to achieve the project you've described in your narrative description through the budget. Overall, during the review of the application, the review panel the reviewers will be looking at whether the project budget aligns with the proposal project goals and objectives, as well as the overall project's impact. It's important to keep in mind when constructing your budget that the three things we look for in project application are feasibility, can you complete the project in a given period? Sustainability, how can the project continue to impact the targeted community or audience past the 6-month funding timeframe? And scalability, how can the project continue to grow in size or impact after the YPL Small Grants Program concludes? So now to the questions. I know we have a ton of questions. I'll go ahead and start with common funding questions we've received from other small grant programs, as well as potential applicants from this year that have been sent to the YPL Grants at Cultural Vistas inbox this application cycle. To start, some of the questions we've received, the first being, what do I need to consider when making a purchase for the grant? Project teams need to do all of the research when estimating cost, meaning that you need to demonstrate the expenses are cost effective, such as not just picking your favorite airline if you do need air travel for your project. It's important to compare cost and go with a reasonable average price expense line item in your budget. The next question we received is, can I request funding for an already established project, or would it be allowed for our proposed project to use YPL funds to supplement an upcoming project we are planning to implement during the YPL grant period? Cost sharing is definitely allowable, and again, this highlights the sustainability of a project. If you're proposing a collaboration with an existing project, this project would need to still fulfill the requirements listed under the YPL Small Grants Program guidelines, and it would need to be within one of the 4 pillars of YPL. In your project application, you will need to outline that the work already completed with this project and emphasize how the YPL Small Grants 6 months of funding will further the work you're doing with the project. Your application and budget must demonstrate and showcase the specific ways the small grant funds will be applied over the 6 months of the YPL Small Grants Program implementation period. So for example, a previous grantee working with Cultural Vistas on another regional program we manage had a team of members that was already hosting hackathons in various countries, and what they did was they applied for grant funding specifically to host one hackathon in a single country and demonstrated in the budget for that application how the hackathon was a part of the small grant and met all of the grant eligibility and funding requirements. So I'm happy to answer more questions on that. I see you have one pop into the chat. I'll get to that at the end of the list of questions. The next question that I have is, can the funds for the program be used to implement stages of the plan after the 6 months? So the funds that you request through the YPL Small Grants Program should set out to be fully used for the implementation of the project within the 6-month implementation period of the YPL Small Grants Program. So as the implementation occurs, selected teams need to ensure that these funds are used within the funding period, so that's 6 months of the YPL Small Grant Fund Program. Excuse me. The next question we've received is, do I need to provide documents or price quotations with my budget proposal? I know we've touched on this a little bit, and it can be kind of confusing, so I just want to clarify. No, you do not, but if you are trying to demonstrate the need for large equipment, that large durable equipment line that we've noted and had a lot of questions about, you do need to provide a quote. Again, we recommend that if you're planning to include large purchases in your budget, that you do reach out to us for confirmation that the item can be funded. For anyone else, no further quotes or invoices are required for the proposal. I will note that they do help outline that you've done your due diligence in researching each of the cost estimates provided. The next question we had was, can I include subscriptions such as a website host domain? Yes, that is a direct cost associated with your project, and you'll list this. What you'll need to do is outline it by monthly cost as the unit found within the budget template, and this can only be charged up to the length of the grant, so 6 months. Another question we received is, can administrative fees be covered? Administrative fees would be considered under the salary category or the office space and overhead expenses category, and therefore are not fundable. In terms of personnel, an honorarium or speaking fee for a professional assisting with your project, which is not considered a salary, is fundable, and the honorarium should not exceed $250 US per person. We've also received a question as if if honorarium can be provided to team members. So the answer to that question is no, that would be considered a salary and is not allowable, but you can, again, provide an honorarium to outside speakers or professionals. A budget item you can cover for team members is travel, hotel lodging, and per diem for the cost of food that team members might need to implement a training or a workshop, or if travel is involved with the project. The next question we have is there a set exchange rate in USD we should use? Again, we do not have a set exchange rate. If you decide to use your local currency in your budget, it's important to factor this in while developing your budget so that you do not exceed the amount allowable for the grant. And keeping with the bank account and the funding questions, rather than using a project treasurer's bank account, a question we've received is, would it be okay for us to open a bank account specifically for the small grant project? That is totally acceptable. You are welcome to create a bank account specifically for the project. If you are selected to participate in the YPL Small Grants Program, you will need to provide this bank information to Cultural Vistas, and if selected, we'll provide more information on how to do that. Another question we've received is about in-kind donations. In-kind meeting the terms of utilizing resources such as supplies for ink, for a printer, paper, etc. That might not be planned to charge to the grant budget, but is a part of the grant project itself. One of the questions we received is that should be included in the application. You do not need to list this out for each item specifically that is in-kind donated in your budget template. If this is a part of the cost share for your project with partners that you may have, you can include that in the total amount at the top portion of the template dedicated to the cost share total. Let's see what other questions we've received. One of the questions we've received is stipends or per diems for participants. And as I noted, that is a fundable item. If you're having, a workshop or a long program, you can include stipends or per diems to attend such events. This normally for participants is to have meals not already included in programming, and you will categorize this under travel or the other section. And generally how we at Cultural Vistas calculate this is by day and using a researched estimate of cost of meals in the city or the country that you're hosting the program. And it's important to have a set rate for all participants across the board and include the breakdown by the amount of per person in your budget. So yes, that is fundable. You just have to provide detail around that. And then last but certainly not least of the questions we've received to our inbox, and then we'll jump into other questions, is may we have a contingency budget included? A general lump sum contingency budget line item is not recommended. This is why we at Cultural Vistas are in constant contact with the selected teams throughout the implementation period. And that's in order to help course correct if a team finds themselves concerned or in need of some assistance with budget management during the implementation period. Throughout the project, it's important to remember that you need to be able to demonstrate that you are spending the money on the requested items that you proposed in your budget through the program. So in conclusion, a few last things to note. The final recorded webinar will be uploaded by the end of this week and can be found at culturalvistas.org in the YPL program tab. Both webinars 1 and 2 are posted for review at this time. Please don't forget that the application closes next week on June 15th, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. New Zealand time. And for those not joining us live today, please feel free to reach out to Cultural Vistas at yplgrants@culturalvistas.org with any questions you may have now and between the application deadline.